The gentle hum of Space Station Unity's life support systems provided a soothing backdrop as James Miller finished organizing his diplomatic files. The station's artificial lighting mimicked Earth's evening glow, casting warm shadows across his simple office. As humanity's lead diplomat on the station, he had learned that sometimes the quietest moments preceded the biggest challenges. He wasn't wrong. The office door slid open with a sharp hiss, and a massive figure ducked through the entrance. Commander Rex of the Crest Empire stood 7 feet tall, his scaled skin shimmering with an iridescent blue that marked him as a high-ranking warrior. 2 junior diplomats scrambled in behind him, their faces pale with worry. "Sir," one of them gasped, "we tried to schedule a proper appointment, but—" James raised his hand gently, silencing the flustered aide. He had dealt with enough alien species to recognize barely contained rage when he saw it. The Crest Warrior's tail was rigid, his chest plates fully extended, classic signs of aggression in his species. "Welcome, Commander Rex," James said, standing slowly. "Would you like some water? Or perhaps some heated mineral stones?" It was a deliberate choice, offering comfort items specific to Crest culture. Rex's inner eyelids flickered in surprise, but his stance remained hostile. "You know our customs, human. Then you must also know why I am here." James carefully kept his expression neutral. "Perhaps you could enlighten me. Your latest trade agreement with the mining guild." Rex's voice boomed through the office. "You knew they had outstanding debts to the Crest Empire. By establishing new terms with them, you have undermined our authority in the sector." The human diplomat nodded thoughtfully. He had expected this conversation, though not quite so dramatically. "The agreement includes provisions for settling all previous obligations, Commander, including those to your people." Words. Rex slammed his armored fist on James's desk, leaving a noticeable dent. Words and papers, and clever little diplomatic tricks. "This is how your kind fights, with invisible weapons that strike at the heart of warrior cultures." James noticed how the commander's voice caught slightly on the word warrior. There was something deeper here, something beyond trade agreements and political posturing. "In the old ways," Rex continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble, "disputes were settled with honor and clarity. I challenge you, James Miller of Earth, to combat in the station's ceremonial arena. Tomorrow at peak rotation." The junior diplomats gasped. The arena hadn't seen real combat in years. It was mostly used for cultural demonstrations and ceremonial events. A formal challenge from a Crest warrior couldn't be ignored without serious diplomatic consequences. James studied the alien before him. Behind the rage and militant posture, he caught glimpses of something else. Fear, perhaps. Loss. The station's databases held extensive information about recent Crest history. He would need to do some research. "I accept your challenge, Commander Rex," James said quietly. The commander's tail twitched in surprise. He had clearly expected a refusal. "You accept? You? A human?" He gave a barking laugh that held no humor. "You are barely half my size. My armor alone weighs more than you." James smiled gently. "Size isn't everything, Commander. As you pointed out, humans have our own ways of handling challenges." "Tomorrow, then," Rex growled, turning to leave. "At peak rotation. Bring whatever weapons you wish. You'll need them." The door slid shut behind him with a decisive thud. The junior diplomats immediately burst into concerned chatter, but James tuned them out. He was already accessing the station's historical databases, particularly the records from the Crest border conflicts. Something in Rex's bearing, in the way he spoke of warrior culture, hinted at personal loss. The next 24 hours would be crucial, but not for practicing combat moves or selecting weapons. James had a different kind of preparation in mind. Sometimes, he had learned, the greatest battles were won long before anyone stepped into an arena. He just hoped he would have enough time to understand what was really driving the commander's challenge. Because in his experience, it was rarely about what it seemed to be about. While other humans might have spent the night before a duel practicing combat moves, James sat cross-legged in his quarters, surrounded by holographic displays of Crest Empire history. The soft blue glow of the screens lit up his determined face as his eyes moved quickly from one record to another. "Computer, show me Commander Rex's military service record again," he said softly. The display shifted, showing images of a younger Rex leading a unit of Crest warriors. James leaned forward, studying the way the commander stood with his soldiers. Back then, his posture had been open, his scaled jaw often lifted in what the database identified as a Crest smile. Then came the Battle of Starpoint 7. James watched the archived footage for the third time. Rex's unit, defending a civilian transport from raiders, fought bravely but was overwhelmed. The commander was the only survivor, pulled from the wreckage of his ship after 3 days in a damaged life pod. After that, James mumbled to himself. He never led another unit, requested solo assignments only. Standing up, James walked to a small replicator unit in his wall. He pressed a few buttons, and moments later, a small box appeared. Inside was a traditional Crest mourning stone, a simple crystal that warriors carried to remember fallen companions. He had spent valuable diplomatic credits getting the replication pattern just right. The station's night cycle was quiet as James made his way through the corridors. He stopped outside Rex's temporary quarters and carefully placed the box by the door. No note, no explanation, just the stone, its surface etched with the traditional Crest symbols for honor and remembrance. It wasn't the first gift he had left. Over the past 18 hours, James had arranged for small items to be delivered. A portion of specialty meat from Rex's homeworld, a vial of scale polishing oil favored by Crest warriors, and a data crystal containing old songs from Rex's home region. "Sir," a worried voice called out. It was Tom, one of his junior diplomats, hurrying down the corridor. "What are you doing? The duel is in 6 hours. You should be in the training room, or getting rest at least." James smiled. "I am training, Tom, just not in the way everyone expects." "But sir, Commander Rex has spent all night in the practice arena. The sensors show he's been running combat drills for hours. He's a trained warrior, and you're—" Tom trailed off, embarrassed. "I'm just a human diplomat," James finished, his eyes twinkling. "Sometimes the strongest armor isn't made of metal, Tom. Did you bring what I asked for?" Tom handed over a small datapad. "Yes, sir. It took some doing, but we found it in the deep archives. The personal log of one of Rex's soldiers, recovered from Starpoint 7. James took the pad carefully, treating it with obvious respect. "Thank you. This might be the most important weapon I'll carry tomorrow." "Weapon, sir?" "Understanding, Tom. The deepest kind." James started walking back to his quarters. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be interesting." "But sir," Tom called after him, "aren't you afraid?" James paused, considering the question. "Fear is natural, Tom. But I've learned something in my years of diplomatic service. Sometimes what looks like aggression is really pain-wearing armor. The trick isn't to break through that armor with force." He left the sentence unfinished, continuing down the corridor. Behind him, Tom stood confused, watching his superior walk calmly towards what everyone else on the station thought would be his doom. Back in his quarters, James spent the remaining hours studying the recovered log, learning about Rex through the eyes of those who had served with him. The commander they described was different from the angry warrior who had challenged him. He had been kind, protective of his unit, known for sharing stories around the fire after missions. As station dawn approached, James finally stood and stretched. He wouldn't be carrying any weapons into the arena. He had something far more powerful. The truth about a warrior who had lost his way, and perhaps a path back to who he used to be. The station's ceremonial arena filled quickly with spectators from every species on Unity Station. Floating light orbs cast a bright glow over the circular space, which had been cleared of its usual cultural displays. The metal floor gleamed, polished smooth by generations of ceremonial events, and occasional real combat. In the viewing stands, dozens of different alien species crowded together. The crest warriors stood rigid in their designated section, their scales glinting under the lights. On the opposite side, the human diplomatic corps sat in nervous silence. The rest of the arena buzzed with excited chatter in multiple languages. "They say the human hasn't even been to the training rooms," a small furry alien whispered to its companion. "Classic human arrogance," its friend replied. "They always think they can talk their way out of everything." The arena's main doors slid open with a deep boom. Commander Rex entered, his ceremonial armor catching the light and throwing rainbow reflections across the walls. He carried a traditional crest war staff in one hand and a curved blade in the other. His steps were heavy and purposeful, each footfall echoing in the suddenly quiet space. A young crest warrior in the stand spoke up. "Look at his form. The human won't last 30 seconds. But older crest warriors noticed something different. Rex's tail wasn't held in the proper ceremonial position. His chest plates weren't fully extended in the traditional display of pride. Small signs, but to those who knew crest culture, they hinted at inner turmoil. The opposite door opened. James walked in wearing his regular diplomatic uniform, carrying only a small wooden box. No armor, no weapons, no protective gear of any kind. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "Is this some kind of joke?" Someone shouted from the stands. Rex's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of confusion. "Where are your weapons, human? Do you mock our traditions by coming here unprepared?" James walked to the center of the arena, his footsteps quiet compared to Rex's armored stride. "I bring no weapons, Commander Rex, because this isn't really about combat, is it?" The crest warrior growled, his tail whipping back and forth. "You know nothing about what this is about. You come here, changing everything with your treaties and agreements, weakening the old ways." "The old ways," James said softly, but his voice carried in the silent arena, like the way a commander would sing the song of heroes with his unit after a successful mission. Rex froze. His grip on his weapons tightened. James continued, opening the wooden box, or the way he would share his personal supply of grove berries with injured soldiers. He pulled out a small package wrapped in leaves. The sweet smell of grove berries, rare and precious to the crest, wafted through the air. How do you know these things?" Rex's voice had lost some of its thunder. James reached back into the box and pulled out a data crystal. "Because your soldiers wrote about you, Commander. The real you. Not this armor you've been hiding behind." He held up the crystal. "Would you like to hear what Private Marsh wrote about his commander 3 days before Starpoint 7? The arena was so quiet you could hear the station's life support systems humming. Rex stood perfectly still, his weapons lowered slightly. Around the arena, the older crest warriors leaned forward, recognizing the name of a famous last stand. "You researched my past," Rex said, but the anger in his voice was mixed with something else now. "You left those gifts at my door." James nodded. "Because that's what humans do, Commander. We don't just study battle tactics. We study hearts. And yours is carrying a weight that no warrior should bear alone." He took another step forward, still holding the crystal. "You challenged me to combat. I accept. But I choose the weapons, and I choose to fight with truth and memory. Shall we begin?" The crowd held its breath. In the crest section, an elder warrior nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. This was no mockery of their traditions. It was something deeper, something that reached past scales and armor to the core of what their warrior culture truly meant. The arena's silence grew heavier as James held up the data crystal. His steady hand didn't shake, even as Rex's massive form towered over him. The human's calm demeanor made several aliens in the crowd shift uncomfortably. They had come expecting blood sport, not whatever this was. "Private Marsh's last log entry," James said, his voice clear and strong. He pressed play. A young crest voice filled the arena. "Commander Rex saved us again today. Raiders hit our supply line, but instead of retreating, he led us straight through their ambush. But that's not why I'm recording this. It's what he did after. Rex's weapons lowered further, his tail going completely still. He spent 6 hours helping us treat the wounded. A commander doing medic work. He said something I'll never forget. The true warrior's strength isn't in how many they defeat, but in how many they protect. The crystal's light pulsed softly as the voice continued. That's why we'd all follow him anywhere. He doesn't just lead us in battle. He leads us in life. James clicked off the recording. 3 days later, you led them one last time. At Starpoint 7, you protected thousands of civilian refugees. Your unit died heroes. Stop. Rex's voice cracked. You have no right to speak of this. I have every right, James replied gently. Because you didn't challenge me over trade agreements. You challenged me because humans remind you of what you lost. We protect through words instead of weapons, just like you once protected through more than just fighting. Rex's war staff clattered to the floor. The sound echoed through the arena, making several spectators jump. The massive warrior's scales had dulled, a sign of strong emotion in his species. They were my responsibility, Rex whispered, but in the perfect acoustics of the arena, everyone heard. My unit, my family. James reached into his box one last time. He pulled out the mourning stone he had left at Rex's door the night before. But now it glowed softly, engraved with the names of every soldier lost at Starpoint 7. On Earth, James said, we have a saying. The heaviest weight a leader carries is the memory of those they couldn't save. But look around you, Commander. He gestured to the crest section of the audience. Several of the older warriors were standing now, their right hands pressed to their chest plates, the highest sign of respect in their culture. Your unit's sacrifice saved over 3,000 civilians that day. Some of them were crest. Some of their children are in this very arena. You didn't fail your warriors, Commander. You led them to the most noble victory possible, the protection of innocent lives. Rex's other weapon fell. The clang seemed to release something in the proud warrior. His defensive posture collapsed, chest plates pulling close in what humans had learned was the crest equivalent of grief. I haven't spoken their names since that day, Rex said. I couldn't. I didn't deserve to. James stepped forward, holding out the mourning stone. Speak them now. Let us honor them together. Not as opponents in an arena, but as two beings who understand the price of protecting others. A sound rose from the crest section, a low, humming tone, the traditional beginning of their song of remembrance. It spread through their ranks, growing stronger. Rex's scaled hand shook as he reached for the mourning stone. When his fingers touched it, the glow brightened, and the names of his lost unit shimmered in the air above it. Private Marsh, he began, his warrior's voice carrying clear above the harmony of his people's song. Private Turner. Sergeant Wells. As Rex recited each name, James stood quietly beside him, head bowed in respect. The human had brought no weapons to this duel, yet somehow he was winning a victory far greater than combat could have achieved. In the stands, the young crest warrior who had predicted a 30-second fight whispered to his elder, I don't understand. What's happening? The elder placed a hand on the youth's shoulder. Watch closely, young one. This is what true strength looks like. The song of remembrance faded into silence, but its echo seemed to linger in the arena. Rex still held the mourning stone, his massive frame no longer radiating anger, but something more vulnerable. The watching crowd remained completely still, caught in the gravity of the moment. Finally, Rex spoke. His voice had changed. The thunderous challenge was gone, replaced by a tone few had ever heard from a crest warrior. I was afraid, he admitted, the words seeming to surprise even him. Not of you, human. Not of combat. I was afraid of what your way of doing things meant for my people. James nodded encouragingly, but remained silent, letting Rex find his words. We crest have always been warriors. For 10,000 years, our strength has been in our arms, in our courage, in our willingness to fight. Rex's tail moved slowly, no longer aggressive but thoughtful. Then humans arrived, and suddenly the galaxy changed. You won victories without firing shots. You built alliances where we saw only enemies. A murmur went through the crowd. Many species had harbored similar thoughts, but never heard them spoken aloud, especially not by a crest commander. I watched as more of our young chose diplomatic training over warrior traditions. Rex continued. Trade agreements replaced combat trials. And he looked down at the morning stone, still glowing with the names of his lost unit. I blamed your species for weakening us. It was easier than facing my own pain. James stepped closer, his movement careful but unafraid. Commander, may I share something about Earth's history? Rex nodded, his inner eyelids blinking in curiosity. We had warrior cultures too. Proud traditions of combat and honor. The samurai of Japan, the knights of Europe, the Maasai warriors of Africa. We didn't lose those traditions when we learned other ways to solve problems. James smiled gently. Instead, we learned that true warrior spirit isn't about how many battles you fight. It's about what you choose to protect and how you choose to protect it. The human gestured to the fallen weapons on the arena floor. Your weapons and armor aren't what make you a warrior, Commander Rex. It's your dedication to protecting others. That's something that never has to change, even as the methods evolve. Rex's scales shifted color slightly, showing hints of blue that hadn't been seen since his younger days. The human speaks truth, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. I see now that this challenge was born from fear and pain, not honor. He turned to face the crest section of the audience. I forgot our highest teaching. A warrior's greatest strength is not in their arms, but in their heart. He placed one hand over his chest plates. I forgot until a human diplomat reminded me, using our own traditions and memories. The older crest warriors nodded in approval, while the younger ones watched in fascination. This was not the combat they had expected, but they were witnessing something rarer, the transformation of a warrior's spirit. James Miller of Earth, Rex announced formally, using the traditional address of his people, I withdraw my challenge. Not in surrender, but in recognition of a battle already won, not by you over me, but by wisdom over fear. James bowed slightly, respecting the formal moment. The withdrawal is accepted with honor, Commander Rex of the Crest Empire. An older crest warrior stood in the audience, his voice ringing out. The duel is concluded. Honor is satisfied. The arena erupted in sound. Not the bloodthirsty cheers they had come expecting to voice, but something more thoughtful. Different species turned to each other, discussing what they had witnessed. Several young crest warriors were already requesting copies of the day's recording for their training archives. Rex looked at the morning stone one last time before carefully handing it back to James. Keep it, James said quietly. They were your family. Remember them with pride, not shame. The commander's eyes met the humans. Perhaps you could tell me more about these Earth warrior cultures over a meal. I find myself curious about how they adapted without losing their core. James smiled. I'd be honored, Commander. After all, that's what friends do. 3 days after the arena event, Unity Station buzzed with a different kind of energy. The diplomatic wing's largest meeting room had been transformed. Traditional crest warrior banners hung alongside Earth's diplomatic flags, and the air smelled of both human coffee and crest ceremonial spices. James stood near the entrance, watching as something unprecedented unfolded before him. A group of young crest warriors sat with human diplomatic trainees, each side eagerly learning from the other. At one table, a crest warrior demonstrated proper battle staff positioning, while his human partner explained the art of reading body language across species. Remarkable. A familiar voice rumbled behind him. Commander Rex had exchanged his battle armor for formal diplomatic dress, though he still carried himself with a warrior's pride. A week ago, I would have called this impossible. James smiled. Nothing is impossible when people choose to understand each other. They watched as a young crest female named Kira attempted to use human-style negotiation tactics in a practice session. Her scales flickered with excitement as she successfully resolved a mock trade dispute without once reaching for her ceremonial weapon. "She reminds me of Private Marsh," Rex said softly, but his voice held pride rather than pain. The Morning Stone hung at his belt, no longer a weight of shame, but a badge of honor, always eager to learn new ways of doing things. A commotion at the far end of the room drew their attention. Two aliens, a crest warrior and a human diplomat, were demonstrating an innovative combination of their cultures. The human used diplomatic hand signals while the crest responded with traditional combat stances, each movement carrying meaning in both their languages. "They're creating something entirely new," James observed. "Not just human, not just crest, but something better." Rex nodded, his scales showing the bright blue of contentment. "This morning, I received a message from the Crest High Command. They want to establish a permanent cultural exchange program here on Unity Station. They're calling it the Bridge of Ways." "That's wonderful news." James turned to his friend. "And who did they choose to lead it?" Rex's tail swayed in what James had learned was embarrassment. "They offered it to me. Said something about my unique perspective on blending traditions. I suspect you had something to do with that recommendation." James raised his hands innocently. "I merely suggested that someone with deep respect for both the old ways and new possibilities would be ideal for the position." Their conversation was interrupted by a young human diplomat rushing up with a datapad. "Commander Rex, could you explain these Crest honor codes? We're trying to integrate them into our diplomatic training." Without hesitation, Rex launched into a detailed explanation, his warrior's knowledge now serving a different kind of mission. James watched as other students, both human and crest, gathered around to listen. "Oh," Rex paused in his lecture, turning back to James. "The arena is being renovated tomorrow. The station council approved our proposal." James nodded in satisfaction. The ceremonial combat arena would be transformed into a space for cultural exchange and learning. One section would still honor combat traditions, but the rest would be dedicated to what they now called warrior diplomacy, the art of strength through understanding. Later that evening, as the mixed group of students practiced together, one of the young crest warriors asked Rex, "Commander, do you regret not having actual combat in the arena that day?" Rex looked at James, who was helping another student understand Crest's ceremonial greetings. "No," he replied thoughtfully. "I went in expecting to fight for our traditions. Instead, I learned how to preserve them in a way that makes them stronger." He touched the Morning Stone at his belt. "Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from turning them into a friend." The students' scales flickered in understanding. Around them, the room continued to buzz with activity. Human and crest, diplomat and warrior, each learning from the other, each growing stronger together. Besides, Rex added with a hint of amusement in his voice, "Who says there wasn't combat that day? The human just chose better weapons." 6 months had passed since the day a human diplomat faced a crest warrior in Unity Station's arena. The station's calendar marked it as a normal day. But for James Miller and Commander Rex, it was an anniversary worth celebrating. They stood together in what had once been the arena, now transformed into the Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Center. The old combat floor had been divided into different learning spaces, though they had preserved one corner as a memorial to all warriors who had served with honor, including Rex's fallen unit. "The latest numbers came in," James said, checking his datapad. "Over 300 species have sent representatives to learn about warrior diplomacy. Even the traditionally isolated rock dwellers have requested to join next month's program." Rex nodded, his scales shimmering with pride. "And the Crest Academy reports that applications for diplomatic training have tripled. But here's what would surprise my younger self the most. Our warriors are stronger for it, not weaker." They watched as a class concluded nearby. A mixed group of students, crest, human, and various other species, bowed to each other in a gesture that combined Earth's diplomatic courtesy with Crest Warrior respect. Commander Rex. A young Crest Warrior hurried over, her scales bright with excitement. The simulation results are in. Our team scored highest in both combat readiness and diplomatic resolution. Well done, Kira, Rex replied. She had been among the first to join the new program and now helped teach others. Which skills proved most useful? The human emotional recognition techniques, combined with our traditional battle focus, she reported proudly. We saw not just the surface conflict but the underlying causes, just like you taught us. As Kira hurried off to share the news with her teammates, an older Crest Warrior approached. James recognized him as one of the elders who had been in the arena that day. I opposed this program at first, the elder admitted, watching the students disperse. I thought it would dilute our ways. I was wrong. Our warriors now understand not just how to fight, but when not to fight. That is true wisdom. Rex touched the morning stone that still hung at his belt. My unit at Starpoint 7 died protecting others. Now we found a new way to protect, by preventing conflicts before they begin. The station's announcement system chimed softly, and James checked the time. The afternoon session is about to start. Would you like to tell them the story today, Rex? The commander had made it a tradition to share the tale of the arena challenge with each new group of students, not as a story of combat avoided, but as a lesson in seeing beyond surface conflicts to deeper truths. Actually, Rex said, I thought we could tell it together this time. After all, it took both a warrior and a diplomat to write it. They made their way to the teaching area, where students from dozens of worlds waited eagerly. Some wore diplomatic robes, others carried ceremonial weapons, but all sat together without the old divisions of their peoples. As they began to speak, James noticed something that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. In the front row, a young Crest Warrior was showing the human student how to hold a ceremonial staff, while the human explained Earth meditation techniques for staying calm during negotiations. Looking at them, Rex whispered, I see the future, not just of our peoples, but of the galaxy. James smiled, remembering the tense moments before their arena meeting, and to think it all started with a challenge. No, my friend, Rex corrected gently. It started with understanding. The challenge was just the door that needed opening. Around them, Unity Station hummed with life as dozens of species learned, grew, and changed together. The old arena, once a place of combat, now rang with voices speaking of peace, understanding, and a new kind of strength. And somewhere, James liked to think, Rex's old unit was watching with pride as their commander continued to protect others, just in a way none of them could have imagined.